What if everything you've been told about success, belonging, and human connection is wrong? What if the path to true mastery requires not networking and collaboration, but radical isolation? What if the greatest strength comes not from being part of something larger than yourself, but from standing utterly alone? In the spring mists of 17th-century Japan, a solitary figure wandered the mountain paths with nothing but 2 swords and an indomitable will. Miyamoto Musashi, perhaps the greatest swordsman who ever lived, answered these questions with his life. He chose a path that few could understand and even fewer could endure, the path of absolute solitude. His story is not merely one of martial prowess or tactical genius, but a profound meditation on what it means to walk alone through life, to find strength in isolation, and to forge mastery through relentless self-confrontation. Musashi's choice to remain a ronin, a masterless samurai, was revolutionary in an era when social structure and loyalty to a lord defined one's entire existence. He deliberately rejected the comfort of patronage, the security of a daimyo's service, and the social acceptance that came with belonging to a clan. Instead, he embraced a life of wandering, engaging in over 60 duels without a single defeat, and ultimately transcending the mere art of swordsmanship to achieve something far greater, complete self-mastery. The making of a solitary warrior. Born in 1584 in Harima Province, Musashi entered the world of violence early. At 13, he fought and killed his first opponent in a duel. By 16, he had already earned a reputation as a fierce warrior. But these early years were marked by a crucial decision that would define his entire philosophy: the rejection of traditional schools and masters in favor of forging his own path. This was not mere arrogance or rebelliousness. Musashi understood something fundamental about mastery that transcended the martial arts. True understanding cannot be borrowed or inherited. It must be won through direct experience, through countless hours of solitary practice, through facing death again and again until fear becomes irrelevant. He famously wrote in the Book of 5 Rings that he never had a teacher in strategy, and this was not a boast but a statement of methodology. Every lesson was carved from real combat, every insight purchased with blood and sweat. The life of a wandering duelist was brutally harsh. Musashi spent years traveling through Japan, seeking out renowned swordsmen and schools, challenging them to mortal combat. He slept in caves, under bridges, in forests. He went days without food. He bathed infrequently, becoming known for his unkempt appearance. Yet this physical hardship was deliberate, a form of spiritual tempering. By stripping away all comfort and companionship, Musashi forced himself to confront not just external enemies but internal demons: doubt, fear, attachment, the desperate human need for approval and belonging. The philosophy of solitude. What distinguished Musashi from other great warriors was not merely his technical skill but his philosophical understanding of solitude's transformative power. In an age that valorized loyalty, tradition, and social hierarchy, Musashi articulated a radically different vision: that true strength comes from complete self-reliance, that mastery requires isolation, and that the crowd is always wrong. In the Book of 5 Rings, written in the final years of his life, Musashi crystallized the wisdom gained from decades of solitary wandering. He wrote, "Do not seek to follow in the footsteps of the wise, seek what they sought." This distinction is crucial. Most people mistake the map for the territory, following others' paths rather than discovering their own. Solitude becomes the crucible in which one learns to think independently, to question received wisdom, to develop one's own methodology through direct experience rather than second-hand instruction. Musashi understood that groups, whether schools, traditions, or social circles, inevitably develop orthodoxies that calcify thinking. When you train with others, you unconsciously adopt their assumptions, their limitations, their fears. The solitary practitioner, by contrast, is forced to question everything. Without the comfort of consensus, every technique must be tested, every principle verified through actual combat. This ruthless empiricism, this willingness to abandon any method that proves ineffective, is only possible in isolation. But Musashi's solitude was not mere isolation. It was what we might call productive solitude, a deliberate withdrawal from society for the purpose of intense self-cultivation. He practiced daily for hours, refining techniques, training his perception, developing the extraordinary timing and spacing that made him unbeatable. His isolation was the laboratory in which he conducted experiments in human excellence. The Dokkodo, the path of aloneness. 1 week before his death at age 62, Musashi wrote a brief text that distilled his philosophy into 21 precepts. The Dokkodo, or the path of aloneness alone, is perhaps the most austere and uncompromising guide to self-mastery ever written. Its very first principle declares, "Accept everything just the way it is." This is not passive acceptance but warrior stoicism, the refusal to waste energy complaining about circumstances while maintaining the will to transform them. The subsequent principles read like a manifesto for radical independence. Do not seek pleasure for its own sake. Do not depend on a partial feeling. Think lightly of yourself and deeply of the world. Never stray from the way. Do not seek to possess either goods or fiefs. Do not pursue the taste of good food. Do not hold on to possessions you no longer need. Do not follow customary beliefs. Do not collect weapons or practice with weapons beyond what is useful. Do not fear death. Do not seek to own fields or land. Do not regret what you have done. Never be jealous. Never let yourself be saddened by a separation. Resentment and complaint are appropriate neither for oneself nor others. Do not let yourself be guided by the feeling of lust or love. In all things have no preferences. Be indifferent to where you live. These precepts shock modern sensibilities. They seem to advocate for a life devoid of pleasure, connection, or joy. But Musashi was not counseling misery. He was describing freedom. Every attachment, every preference, every desire is a potential weakness, a lever that circumstance or enemies can use to manipulate you. The loner who follows the Dokkodo becomes impervious to external pressure, unbribable, unmanipulable, utterly self-contained. This is not emotional deadness but the ultimate form of psychological sovereignty. The two-sword style, a metaphor for independence. Musashi's martial innovation, the simultaneous use of both long and short swords, was not merely a tactical choice but a philosophical statement about independence and adaptability. Traditional schools taught fighting with a single weapon, developing extraordinary proficiency within a narrow range. Musashi rejected this specialization as a form of dependency. If circumstances deprived you of your primary weapon, your expertise became useless. By training with two swords, and by extension with any and all weapons, Musashi developed what we might call strategic flexibility. He could fight in confined spaces or open ground, on horseback or on foot, with steel or with wood. His famous duel with Sasaki Kojiro exemplifies this principle. Kojiro was perhaps the finest swordsman in Japan, wielding a blade 3 feet long with legendary skill. Musashi arrived late, disheveled, carrying only a wooden sword carved from an oar. Yet he won, killing Kojiro with a single blow. The lesson extends far beyond combat. The loner must be a generalist, capable of solving any problem without relying on specialized support. Where the specialist depends on ideal conditions and established methods, The generalist adapts to whatever circumstances present. This is the power of true independence. Not having a single superior skill, but having sufficient competence across multiple domains that you can handle any situation life presents. The modern relevance of Musashi's path. In our hyper-connected age, Musashi's philosophy might seem not just antiquated but pathological. We are told constantly that success requires networking, collaboration, and building strong social capital. The lone wolf is portrayed as either a romantic failure or a dangerous sociopath. Yet there is a growing recognition, particularly among creative professionals and entrepreneurs, that periods of intense solitude are not just beneficial but necessary for breakthrough work. Consider the creative process. Every significant artistic, scientific, or philosophical breakthrough requires someone to spend long hours alone, wrestling with problems that have no obvious solutions. You cannot write a novel by committee. You cannot discover a new mathematical proof in a brainstorming session. Deep work, the kind that produces genuine innovation, requires sustained, uninterrupted focus that is only possible in solitude. Musashi's daily practice of thousands of sword cuts is fundamentally identical to the writer's daily pages, the programmer's deep coding sessions, the scientist's methodical experiments. Mastery, in any domain, requires that you spend enormous amounts of time alone with your craft. Moreover, Musashi's radical independence speaks to a growing desire to escape the tyranny of social validation. In an era of social media, where every thought can be instantly broadcast and judged, where likes and shares become proxies for self-worth, where outrage mobs can destroy careers overnight, Musashi's philosophy offers a powerful antidote. What if you simply didn't care what others thought? What if you developed such inner certainty that approval became irrelevant? This is not narcissism but its opposite, the absence of ego. When you stop performing for others, you can finally discover who you actually are. The dangers and limitations of extreme solitude. Yet we must acknowledge the shadow side of Musashi's path. His life, for all its achievements, was marked by austerity that bordered on self-punishment. He remained unmarried, formed few deep friendships, and lived in conditions of voluntary poverty. While this single-minded focus enabled his mastery, it also meant he experienced few of the joys that make human life meaningful. Intimate partnership, community belonging, the simple pleasure of comfort and security. There is also the question of whether Musashi's method is universally applicable or specific to his particular genius and historical context. Not everyone has the psychological resilience to endure prolonged isolation. Humans are social animals. We are literally wired for connection. Extended loneliness can lead to depression, cognitive decline, and even physical health problems. The research is clear. Strong social relationships are one of the most robust predictors of longevity and happiness. Perhaps the wisdom lies not in wholesale adoption of Musashi's austere path, but in understanding its strategic value. Solitude should not be permanent exile but temporary retreat, a phase of intense development before returning to engage with the world. Think of it as altitude training for the soul. You withdraw not to escape life but to prepare for it, building the psychological and skill-based resources that will make you more effective when you rejoin society. Practical applications. Cultivating the loner's power. How might one apply Musashi's principles without abandoning modern life entirely? The key is to create structured periods of productive solitude within an otherwise connected existence. This might mean establishing a daily practice of early morning work before the world wakes, creating sacred time when you are absolutely unavailable to others. It might mean taking periodic retreats, a weekend, a week, a month, where you withdraw completely to focus on a specific project or skill development. The practice of what we might call deliberate isolation, requires several elements. First, clear objectives. Know what you're trying to achieve during your solitary time. Musashi's goal was martial perfection. Yours might be completing a creative project, developing a new skill, or achieving clarity on a major life decision. Second, elimination of distractions. Truly solitary work means no phone, no internet, no interruptions. The modern world makes this difficult, but that difficulty is precisely why it's valuable. Third, physical challenge. Incorporate some form of bodily discipline, rigorous exercise, cold exposure, fasting, that keeps you grounded in physical reality and prevents the haziness that can come from too much mental work. Most importantly, cultivate the psychological independence that was Musashi's true mastery. This means developing your own standards of excellence rather than adopting society's metrics. It means being willing to hold unpopular opinions if your own analysis leads you there. It means building genuine competence across multiple domains so that you're not dependent on others' expertise. It means, ultimately, becoming someone who can walk alone through life without fear, without regret, without the desperate need for validation that cripples so many. The paradox of the loner. There is a profound paradox at the heart of Musashi's philosophy. He withdrew from society to better serve it. His Book of 5 Rings, written in isolation during the final years of his life, has influenced millions. His art, particularly his ink paintings, is treasured across the world. His example continues to inspire people nearly 4 centuries after his death. By refusing to compromise his vision for social acceptance, by maintaining absolute integrity to his own understanding, Musashi created something of lasting value. This suggests a different understanding of solitude's purpose. You do not withdraw from the world because you hate people or because you're running away from responsibility. You withdraw because the world needs what only you can create, and you can only create it in solitude. The loner's power is not the power to dominate or control others, but the power to offer something unique, perspective, skill, art, wisdom, that emerges only from deep individual development. In this sense, the path of aloneness is ultimately an act of service. By refusing to be merely a copy of others, by insisting on forging your own way, you expand the range of human possibility. You demonstrate that there are other ways to live, other values to pursue, other definitions of success. In a world that increasingly demands conformity, to political tribes, to social movements, to market demands, the solitary figure who walks their own path becomes a beacon of possibility. Conclusion. The Eternal Wanderer. Miyamoto Musashi died peacefully in a cave in 1645, having given his possessions to his retainers and having written his final philosophical works. He faced death as he had faced life, alone, undaunted, at peace with the path he had chosen. In his final days, he painted a simple image of a solitary monk. It was, perhaps, a self-portrait. The power of the loner that Musashi embodied is not for everyone. It requires exceptional discipline, unusual psychological resilience, and a willingness to sacrifice much of what makes life comfortable. But for those who feel called to walk alone, for the artists, thinkers, and seekers who cannot find their truth in the crowd, Musashi's example offers both validation and guidance. It says, your loneliness is not a flaw but a feature, not a problem to be solved but a strength to be cultivated. What Musashi discovered through his lifetime of solitary practice was something that transcends martial arts or historical period. That true strength comes not from external support but from internal development, that mastery requires isolation from the crowd's influence, and that the willingness to walk alone, truly alone, without compromise or company, is the ultimate form of freedom. In a world that constantly demands our attention, our conformity, our participation in collective delusions, The loner who maintains their own counsel possesses a kind of power that cannot be purchased, granted, or taken away. The wandering swordsman is gone, but his path remains. In every age, a few individuals will recognize themselves in his story. The ones who cannot quite fit, who see the world differently, who need to forge their own way regardless of cost. For them, Musashi whispers across the centuries, "Walk on. The path is lonely, but it leads to mastery. The world will not understand, but that is not your concern. The crowd will call you strange, but you are not here to please them. You are here to become what only you can become, to discover what only solitude can teach, to achieve what only independence can produce. The power of the loner awaits those brave enough to claim it."